Joining me now on the Knicks Film School Podcast. If you have followed this series at all and you are an athletic subscriber, I'm sure you have read this person's work. If you are an NBA fan and you like to read about different teams, you have read this person's work because he is one of the absolute best there is. I had a bunch of different things that I was going to start by introducing him with, other than saying he writes for The Athletic about the Atlanta Hawks, but all of that is superseded because I have to just say, mentioned by Doris Burke on national television. Chris Kirschner, are you still levitating, or have you come down a little bit? Where are you at right now?
I had to sign a few autographs, sign some cards before this podcast. So my time is very, very short and limited because of that. But no, I mean, it was definitely cool to be mentioned by Doris. And I was actually not able to go to game 4 because I saw that. Yeah. But I was watching the game in the hotel lobby that I was staying in, and the game was on mute, so I could only read the closed captions, and I saw my name pop. I was like, holy hell, like this is awesome. But yeah, I mean, it was really cool and really kind of her to shout me out.
I probably would have thought someone was playing a practical joke on me if it was me. But that's fantastic. And well, let's get right into it. The reason she mentioned you is because you wrote easily one of my favorite pieces of the playoffs thus far, despite the fact that it is at the not the expense of the team that we cover here. But well, let's just say it. Trae Young is turning into a star against the New York Knicks. You wrote about that, and I want to start with something specific that you highlighted because I don't think I realized this, which is that the Atlanta, I guess, sports community has really become, I guess, as you write, very protective of Trae, and they kind of prop him up in the face of, I think, a national media that is maybe skeptical is the right word. I'm just curious from your perspective coming into these playoffs. Did you feel like this was possible? And also, if you can speak to it, do you think the team, the Hawks themselves, felt like this was on the verge of happening?
Well, I think for Trae, just from talking with him over the past 3 years now, I knew that he was built for moments like these. He loves to relish in the big stage, and there just haven't been any big stages for him in these past couple of seasons. You know, this is a rebuilding team. They won 29 games his first year, 20 games. And then obviously now they're in the playoffs and on the verge of advancing to the second round. So I think for Trae, it was a matter of just having the majority of NBA fans, reporters actually watch the Hawks in the first place, because there weren't many reasons to watch the Hawks in the past couple of years. You had to seek them out because they weren't on national TV. So if you're not watching the games and you're just reading what other people are saying, it's easy to get your opinion or perspective warped because of that. You know, I've watched every single game. I know how well he's played. I've seen it up close in person. I've talked to him. I've talked to other players around the league. I've talked to scouts. I've talked to executives. So I just feel like Trae has already been this good in the NBA, and it's just a matter of now everybody is seeing that. As far as the Hawks, I think that when you're just talking about the front office perspective and just the team perspective, I think they realized that this was possible. I think that they realized that a series against the Knicks was the best case scenario, just because of the fact that these are two teams that haven't had playoff experience. Mm-hmm. They're both young teams. They're both rebuilding teams. For the Hawks, this was probably their best opportunity to advance to the second round. I don't know if they would have, made easy work of the Heat like the Bucks did. I don't know if that was going to happen, but I do think that, just from a talent perspective, when you just analyze the two rosters, and put them side by side, I do think that the Hawks were clearly the more talented team coming into it. So I feel like this isn't really a surprise to see them up 3-1 right now. Yeah.
And that's a good transition because again, root for the Knicks, have always rooted for the Knicks and was very hopeful coming into this series, but not because I thought the Knicks had more talent, because I agree with you. I think if you're just being honest, you figured, okay, maybe the Knicks would have the best player in the series, obviously that has not come to fruition in terms of the performance on the court, but that there would be some kind of ethereal quality about what the Knicks would bring, and the Thibodeau and the toughness and the whole, and maybe we'll get into some of the Capella comments in a bit. All that said, I was expecting a 7-game series. I thought the Knicks would edge it out, and who knows? There's still some games to be played. We're recording this ahead of Game 5. Sitting here right now, are you surprised that the series is 3-1, or did you kind of expect this to be go the way that it's gone so far?
Well, I predicted Hawks in 6 before the series began. I still think it's going to be Hawks in 6. I do think that the Knicks are going to end up winning Game 5 just because of the fact that their backs are against the wall. It's do or die situation, and the Hawks it's a tough environment. I would assume that the crowd on Wednesday is going to be electric and insane, just as it was in the first 2 games. So I would imagine that just from that alone, that the Knicks are going to have some juice going into that matchup. So I still think it's going to be Hawks in 6. So the fact that the Knicks have just played just absolutely just horrendously in the past 2 games, no, I did not see that coming. I thought that
makes 2 of us.
I thought most of these games were going to be really, really tight, come down to the wire, which is what we saw in the first 2 games. Yeah. I expected that throughout the entire series. I didn't expect the Hawks to win by 15, 20 plus.
And in the regular season, I mean, I don't know what the final scores of those games were, but the Hawks had leads of, 7, 11, and 15, I think, in those games. The Knicks wound up winning them, but those were all close as well.
Yeah, so I expected that to continue in the playoffs, and the past 2 games, the Hawks made all their threes essentially, and the Knicks didn't, and that's the reason why we're in this position today with the Hawks up 3-1. If the Knicks could make some shots, if the Knicks could have some sort of offense, I feel like it would be a different conversation we're having, but that just hasn't been the case. They haven't gotten really any offense outside of Derrick Rose. Randall's been a mess. RJ Barrett, I mean, he played well in the last game, but outside of that, he hasn't done anything. So I just don't know how anyone right now could say, yeah, I mean, the Knicks are going to end up winning in 7 just because of the fact of what we've seen. They haven't had any sort of offensive rhythm, and the Hawks do. They have that. Even if a guy is off for a night, they have so many shooters on the team that it's really hard to stop the amount of firepower that they have when you compare it to what the Knicks have, which is Randall. And obviously Randall hasn't looked like regular season Randall. So for the Knicks perspective, it's really difficult to say, this is a team that can end up coming back and winning in 7 games.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Hawks' firepower. I was looking it up today. I mean, Kevin Huerter is shooting not on a ton of volume, but he's still shooting 50% from deep in the series after shooting 17% from deep. And what I didn't realize actually until I looked it up today, he had taken by far the most threes of any Hawk player over the 3 regular season games. So it's not only that he wasn't hitting them, he was taking a ton of shots and he wasn't hitting a lot of them. He's turned it around, obviously. Gallo started off slow, but as you said, everybody with the Hawks seems to be making everything the last 2 games. He was 4 for 4 in game 3. I think that was huge. So yeah, they are hitting their shots. I guess what I'm curious to hear from you in terms of the Hawks defense, because I think that's there is a sense that they have, kind of figured out Randall. And I don't know if that's the word or the term I'm most comfortable with, because I think all they're doing is they're saying, okay, if you're going to beat us by making tough shots, you're going to beat us by making tough shots. But we are like that. That's what we're going to live with. And the Knicks have had open threes. They have not made those open threes. Guys, nobody else is really putting the ball on the floor other than, as you said, Derrick Rose. Did you think the Hawks defense was capable of doing this coming into this series?
I don't think the Hawks defense has been particularly stout and impressive. I just think that the Knicks are just missing shots. Yeah. I think what they've done against Randall has been impressive. And, coming into the series in the days leading up to it, all of the guys on the team, Nate McMillan, we're all saying, we need to stop Randall. If we can stop Randall or at least limit Randall, we have a really good chance at winning. And that's exactly what they've done. They've doubled him. They've taken away the middle of the paint. He's not getting to the rim. No. He's not making all the jumpers that he was in the 3 games that they played in the regular season. It seemed like Randall was making every single shot he put up against the Hawks. I remember I think it was in the second game, he just made like this ridiculous baseline fall away jumper. I'm like, how do you stop that?
I know the one. It almost looked like it went over the backboard. Yeah,
that one. So it's like, how do you stop that? And those were the kinds of shots that he was making against them in every single game in the regular season. And also, I think for the Hawks, they've gotten healthy at the right time. For the 3 games that they played in the regular season against the Knicks, they didn't have DeAndre Hunter for 2 of them. Trey went out in game 3 with the rolled ankle. I think the Hawks would have won that game if he ended up staying healthy in that. He was torching them.
Up by 9 and with a minute and a half, I think, or to go in the third. Yeah.
Yeah, so I do think that, just from that standpoint, it's easy to get caught up in, the Knicks were 3-0, so they're probably going to end up beating the Hawks. Just when you understand like the amount of injuries they had, it's a different story. But for the Hawks defense, I do feel like what they've done against Randall has been impressive. I wouldn't say like, if they end up advancing and playing Philadelphia, I wouldn't be like, like they're stopping Joel Embiid. They're going to be stopping all these guys. Like, no, I don't see that happening. But I do think that what they've done in this series particularly has been, pretty solid.
Well, I'm curious as to your thoughts about how they might do if they advance. But first, one guy you didn't mention by name, but also did miss. I think he was only out for the second game, was Bogdanovic. And if there was one guy that I think I heard about the most from Knicks fans who were like, why couldn't we have gotten him at that number? It was Bogey. Because I think, he fit what the Knicks needed. Shooter, guy who could do some stuff with the ball, secondary creator, the whole thing. I think coming into this series, and you wrote this, by the way, in your Trey article, when you talked about, Bogdanovic said we needed another guy, or Trey needed another guy who could win games. Well, guess what? They're winning some games now that Bogdanovic is healthy. Do you think he's made as big of a difference in this series? Because I know maybe the numbers, like he hasn't had like a scoring explosion, but the way I see it, it's like it's just another guy that the Knicks have to pay attention to. That occupies some of their attention.
Yeah, I do. I think for on the offensive side of the floor, you can't leave him open. So it's one fewer guy that you can possibly bring out to Trey and trap him at half court or whatever, and you can leave Bogdanovic alone. You just can't do it just because of the fact that he's been one of the best shooters in the league this year. Yeah. He shot 44% from 3 on almost 8 attempts per game. It was at a point, especially in the second half of the season, where if Bogdanovic was putting up a 3, you just expected it to go in. And if he missed 2 or 3 in a row, you're like, is everything okay? Is he hurt? I mean, that's how impressive he was in the regular season. I don't think he's like you said, I don't think he's had that kind of impact in this series. But again, he's just someone that if he's open, you expect him to make the shot. And that's dangerous when you have someone like Trey who can make every single pass in the book. It doesn't matter if Trey is double team, triple team, quadruple team. Like he can still find a way to get the ball to these shooters. And if you have someone like Bogdanovic on the perimeter, Gallinari, Herter, all these guys who can make 36, 37, 38% of their shot attempts from 3, that's a dangerous team that is really, really difficult to defend. And I think that's what we've seen, it particularly in these past 2 games.
And I think one of the things that, a lot of Knicks fans were expecting in terms of how they would defend Trae Young is to get him off the court by putting him in tenuous situations on the other side of the floor when he's playing defense. That has not happened at all. The Hawks have been very smart about putting him onto Reggie Bullock. As you mentioned, Bullock has not done much in this series, had a scoreless game 4. I have obviously not watched that much Hawks basketball over the year. Is this a function of the Hawks are more prepared to deal with the notion of like a team targeting Trey, or is this just a matter of like the Knicks aren't targeting Trey that much, because from the outside looking in, it seems like New York can be doing more and they're not doing it.
Yeah, no, it's that. I mean, the teams have definitely targeted Trey all season long. I mean, pretty much since he entered the league, that's been a known thing. You can target Trey on defense, and he might score 30, but he might give up 30 on the other end of the floor, and that just hasn't been the case. I think for the Knicks, they just don't have the guys to really take advantage of it. I mean, again, you're not asking Reggie Bullock to, run the pick and roll at the top of the key and take guys off the dribble. You're not asking, Obi to do this. Like you don't have really ball handlers on this roster who can take advantage of it. What I was thinking of is that maybe they can go with, super small Derrick Rose, Emmanuel Quickly, RJ Barrett. I mean, maybe that would, get the Knicks more into an offensive rhythm, whereas, they're letting Trey just hide out on Reggie, and Reggie's not making shots. So it's like, well, for Trey, he's taking a break on that end of the floor, and he can do whatever the hell he wants on the other end of the floor. So I just think that if that's the plan for Game 5, Game 6, if it advances that far, and and Thibodeau doesn't change it up and has Bullock out there and lets Trey just hide on him, I don't see any possible way that the Knicks could end up advancing in the series, just because of the fact that what we've seen through 4 games is Trey's going to be able to hide on the defensive side of the floor. They're not going to take advantage of it, and he's going to do whatever he wants on the other end, and the Hawks are going to win the game.
I'm happy you mentioned Quickly. Couple more, and then I'm going to get you out of here. You've been great with your time. He killed the Hawks during the regular season. Again, this is playoff basketball. It's not regular season basketball. It's a different animal. But he has been perhaps almost as much as Reggie Bullock. And it's unfair to say that a rookie is a disappointment in the playoffs because he's a rookie. I mean, this is new territory for him, but he has not had the sort of impact on this series that he had during the regular season. I'm just as curious. You mentioned Tibbs, and you wrote about Nate McMillan after Game 2 about some of the issues from his past that resurfaced by him not putting in those guys earlier. It looks like it may not come back to haunt them. From the outside looking in, it seems like he has coached a better series than Tom Thibodeau, which is not something a lot of people thought would happen beforehand. Do you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I certainly agree with it. After Game 2, part of the reason why McMillan was fired by Indiana is because he didn't do a good job managing his rotation. He didn't do a good job managing the minutes when he was with the Pacers. The Pacers ended up, flailing out in the first round of their playoff matchups under him. And McMillan's postseason record was not good at all coming into the series. And part of the reason why is he's infamously known as being really stubborn when it comes to playing regular season lineups. And that's exactly what we saw in Game 2. He left Trey and Bogdanovic out on the bench way too long. The Hawks were minus 14 when both those guys sat. The next game he adjusts, and we saw 0 seconds of both Trey and Bogdanovic on the bench together. Yeah. So I think that's just one of the things that in the playoffs you have to adjust. I feel like for the most part, Thibodeau hasn't shown that yet. Again, we're talking about Game 5 is Wednesday night, and we're still talking about, well, what can the Knicks do to, take advantage of exposing Trey on the defensive end of the floor? I mean, this isn't a conversation that we should be having in Game 5. They should have figured this out already. In Game 1, you can feel each other out, whatever. Game 2, like, you should expect something different. We didn't see them take advantage of that. I know the Knicks won, but they weren't attacking Trey. Game 3, they weren't attacking Trey. So it's when are we going to see it? If not now, right? Exactly.
It's funny. I went back and I watched all of the Knicks shooting possessions with Trey in the game for Game 4, and by my count, out of 30 in the first half, the Knicks involved him in the action 4 times. That's not what you want. And then it was a few more in the second half, and then the game got out of hand. But It seems like the Knicks and Thibodeau are just like, look, we have to get ourselves going. We can't worry about, who we're attacking, which is like, it's going to be questioned if this series goes this way. We'll see if it does. We'll finish up on this. If the series does go this way, which we'll see. Still games to go. Are the Hawks going to be content to kind of go into Philly and maybe take a game or two, or will the expectations be raised if they do? Let's say if they win this series in 6 or even 5 games, where is this team looking at that point?
Look, I mean, coming into the season, they were content with making the playoffs, making some noise in the first round. If it's the 1-8 matchup, 2-7 matchup, like they win 2 games, great season. Like this is great experience for our young players. Now that they have the opportunity to advance to the second round, it's like, we want to win. We believe in ourselves. We think we can, shoot with any team in the league. We have shooters on this roster. Outside of Capella, the 4 guys who start can all make threes at a really high clip. But I think for a fan perspective, I would tell them to temper their expectations when it comes to matching up with Philly, just because I don't think they match up well with Philly. The Sixers can throw Ben Simmons on Trey. They can throw Tybal on him, Danny Green, Joel Embiid can step out on the perimeter. It's just a different, from a personnel standpoint, it's a much different matchup than this Knicks team. So yeah. I would not think that they have a high chance of, giving Philly a really good scare. But I also think again, we're talking about the Hawks and Knicks, who are still 2 rebuilding teams at the end of the day.
Yes.
I think both of these teams did a great job of overachieving this year. I don't think anybody expected a 4-5 matchup in the playoffs to be Hawks Knicks. I mean, I would like to meet that person.
It wasn't me. But it's funny you mentioned Philly and Embiid. As we're talking, Embiid listed as doubtful for Game 5 against Washington. So, the man hasn't exactly been a picture of health
for sure
for his career.
If he is hurt, then that changes the dynamic of the series, undoubtedly. But if he's healthy and 100%, the knee's not bothering him, I just can't, picture the Hawks being in the Eastern Conference Finals against Brooklyn or Milwaukee.
What a world that would be. Last one, I have to ask about this. So on your Twitter banner, there he is, Mr. Derek Jeter. Give me the story. A Yankee fan, or what's the deal?
Yeah, I actually grew up in the Bronx.
Oh, word! You're kidding me.
Nope, I grew up a Knicks fan. So I was there through all the torturous, painful moments. So I can relate to the Knicks fans who are listening to this. But Yankees have always been my number 1 team. My dog Jeter is lying right next to me. So I'm a big Yankees fan. It's funny because like a lot of people, when you're a reporter, a lot of people just assume that, covering the Yankees is like my dream job. I don't want to cover the Yankees just because I want to yell at my TV screen when Aaron Boone, makes a poor decision to go to the bullpen and pulls Garrett Cole out of, he's 7th innings through and has given up 3 hits and the analytics are saying you have to go to, Zach Britton or whoever it is. It's like, I love that moment. So I can't see myself like covering the Yankees just because I love being a fan.
That's so well. I kind of toe the line. I cover the Knicks, but at the same time, I have not abandoned the fandom, and this is like therapy for me. That's why I tell people who say to me like, "Thank you for doing what you do at Knicks Film School." I'm like, man, this is just free therapy. It's cheaper than sitting on a couch and talking to someone. This has been great, Chris. Can you just let the folks at home know where they could find you before we let you go?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Chris Kirschner. If you're not a subscriber to The Athletic, we do a good job covering the Knicks and mostly every other NBA team out there. So highly recommend our content.
Proud to call Mike Vorkunov. We had him on last. We were talking about this. I think last week was his 6th or 7th time coming on the pod. And as I say every time he's on, and as I will say right now, if you're not a subscriber to The Athletic, I don't know what you're doing. You guys have awesome coverage across the board, not just for the NBA, for all sports. It's fantastic stuff. I really did love that. I've loved all your coverage, but the Trae Young piece was a lot of fun. Star is Born. I like that one too.